Well, we are ready to talk about the second anchor. We began with God loves, and now God listens. I didn't have a lament bone in my body for a long time. I do not remember, I told you last night, I don't remember going to any funerals but one. I probably did, but I don't remember them. Before my wife's own funeral. And I can't remember ever having a lament prayer before that moment. And not even in that moment. I guess my childhood is kind of idealized in my head, and I just don't remember things, and probably there was more going on than I remember or that I bring to my mind. But lament was not part of my experience. But after Sheila died in 1980, I told you last night that I didn't pray. I didn't talk to God. I was angry. I felt betrayed by God. I felt like, God, we made all these plans together to serve you and to be a part of your world and to be a part of your mission, and this is what happens. This doesn't make sense to me. So betrayal was a real feeling inside of me. I felt betrayed. I felt like God and I had this deal, and God let me down. Because I think my understanding of God was kind of quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And if we got this compact, that we're going to do this together, and you do your part and I'll do my part. And I felt like God didn't do his part. Felt betrayed. So I was angry, frustrated, at a loss of, okay, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my life? What does it mean for my goals? And who is this God anyway? This God's not the God I thought I knew, or the thought that I thought I served. Something's wrong here. Well, in the midst of thinking about all that, and a bunch more kind of wasn't so much rational reflection as it was kind of emotional disturbance in my own soul, a friend came alongside of me and suggested that I read the Psalms. Now, that's a brave thing to do, right? It's a brave thing to have a friendship. It's good to have a friendship where you can actually say something like that, but it's a brave thing, even in a friendship, to suggest, here's something that might help you in the midst of your hurt. And I'm very cautious about that. I don't typically do that sort of thing unless I have an opening, unless there's an invitation, unless there's a kind of there's a depth to the friendship, or there's an intimacy in the friendship, then I might suggest something. But this person was brave enough to do that. And my internal response was not my external response. Right? My external response was, I'll think about that. Then go do what you want, right? My internal response is the gall. You think I haven't read the Psalms before? Yeah, I've read the Psalms. I got 2 master's degrees, one in philosophy, one in theology, and I have a Bible degree from Freed Hardeman. I've read the Psalms. So I had this immediate kind of rejection who do you think you are telling me to read the Psalms? It was that internal anger being expressed. That frustration I had with God was coming out sideways, though I didn't let it come out. It stayed inside, and I didn't tell this person that. But it wormed its way into me. For some reason, I started reading the Psalms. And I can remember deciding to do that it was difficult. Did I really want to do this? Did I really want to think about God like that? Did I really want to give God my attention in that way? And it was also, I'd read the Psalms before, and honestly, I didn't get a whole lot out of that. That was my feeling about it. So it was a hard decision, and it really took some kind of movement of the Spirit, I would imagine. But some fortitude to kind of, okay, I'm going to do this. And I started reading. And I get to Psalm 6. How long? In the anguish of my soul, I cry, how long? And I'm going, yeah, that sounds right. I get to Psalm 10. Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And I'm thinking, I could pray that. I can do that. And then I get to Psalm 13, and it really hit me. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long must I have sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look at me. Answer me. Give light to my eyes, lest my enemy rejoice over me. Nevertheless, but I trust in your unfailing love, because your love has been bountiful to me. Now, I can remember when I read that psalm. I can remember those first two verses, it hitting me like a truck. I said, that's exactly how I feel. How long? Why must I have sorrow in my heart? How long will I have this sorrow in my heart? How long will I feel this way? Answer me. Kind of wake up, God, which is what some of the Psalms do say, right? Wake up. What are you, sleeping on the job or something? Get involved. Do something. Psalm 74, verse 14. I like to paraphrase it. Get your hands out of your pocket and do something. It's that kind of song. See now, you can hear the words in Psalm 13. This is where it would be nice to have an inspired audio Bible, right? I would love an inspired audio Bible, because then I get to hear the tone of voice that the psalmist uses. I mean, is this like a wimpy, how long, God? Is it kind of in the corner cowering? And maybe it could be that for some people, because we're maybe afraid of how God's going to respond to the question, Or is it just an angry, how long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? I mean, how is that said? How is it sung in the temple in Israel? How did the people of God in Israel gather as a community and pray this prayer to God? What kind of voice did they use? What kind of melody did they sing? I mean, I have so many questions. And I think that's part of the value of the Psalms, is that they can express emotion in different ways. And they can apply to a whole host of things, because we don't know what Psalm 13 is about. We don't know what's the struggle. We don't know what's going on in the author's context. We don't know what the suffering is. We don't know much about it at all. Except when you're suffering and you read that, you say, "Whoa, that's me. Those are my words. They can become my words." It's like when my daughters were in their teen years, every song on the radio was about them and their boyfriend, right? I mean, they're all about their boyfriend. Because songs do that, don't they? Songs imagine a world in which we can enter. We can enter that world and see ourselves in that song. So I could see myself in the questions. How long? Will you forget me forever? How long must I have sorrow in my heart every day? I could see myself in kind of the demands, the commands to God. Answer me. Give light to my eyes. I'm sitting here in darkness. I need some light. I need something good in my life. I need something besides the sorrow that I feel. I need something else here. God, give light to my eyes. But I don't remember ever praying that way before that moment. I don't remember it. Maybe I did. I just don't remember it. And so when I read Psalm 13, I said, I can pray this. At least the first 4 verses. Because you get to verses 5 and 6, and now you're expressing a trust. I trust in your unfailing love. Well, wait a minute. How do those two things go together? How do you have those kind of questions? And then you also express this trust. How can you make those kind of demands of God? Answer me, wake up, listen, do something, and then also express this trust? How do those two things go together? They seem like, at least the way I was experiencing it, is that the questions disrupted that trust. The questions ran up against that trust. It was hard to trust because of the situation. It was hard to trust because of what was happening. So how can I, on the one hand, raise these questions and yet trust? See, I think that's kind of what the function of lament is. It is a way of expressing our hearts to God so that we can embrace the trust. The two can go together. Now, I think when we focus on lament, especially the laments in the Psalms, there are laments in Jeremiah, there are laments in Habakkuk, there are laments in Job. The Lamentations is a whole book, right, on lament. So lament is all over the place in the Hebrew Bible, and it's present in the New Testament as well. But typically, lament has 3 parts, typically. It could have more, depending on how you think about beginning and ending and certain things, but 3 major components that you're going to find in almost every lament. The first is the complaint. You're going to find the complaint, or the questions, or the problem. Something that the psalmist, whoever is praying this, whoever's writing this, whoever's singing this, they got some kind of situation that is burdensome and they're talking to God about it. They're going to complain about it. They're going to name it before God. And they're going to ask the questions like why and how long and where were you and what's going on here? What does this mean? Those kinds of questions are going to be part of lament. The second part of lament is typically going to be a petition. Do something. Listen. Or act. Or heal. Or redeem. Or deliver. Or some sort of petition. And then the third part of the lament is going to be some sort of expression of trust or praise. It might be a memory of a praise. It might be a anticipation to praise. Or it might be a present praise. It might be an expression of trust in the present. But it can come in different forms. Sometimes it is, if you do this, I will praise you. I mean, sometimes it's that way. So this lament is basically the questions, the petitions, and the praise. Or you could call it the protest, the petitions, and the praise. That way you get 3 P's. Right? You can remember it that way. The protest, the petitions, and the praise. So whenever you're reading a lament psalm, you can watch for those. They're not always in that order. Sometimes the praise comes first. Like in Psalm 44, you have the praise. Oh, I remember you, God. I remember how you brought the people of Israel. I remember how you fought for them. The praise came first, but then the complaint came in the middle. So not always in that order, but with that content. Now, sometimes the praise isn't there. There are a couple of them that the praise is not present, like Psalm 88, which is the psalm of a chronically ill person who's been on the verge of death again and again and again. And that psalmist asks why. There's no praise in it other than the initial, you could call it a praise, I guess, the God who saves. So this chronically ill person is praying to the God who saves. But the rest of it is petition and complaint. In fact, it ends. One translation, I think it's the NIV, that ends Psalm 88 like this. And darkness is my closest friend. I think that's the NIV. Darkness is my closest friend. Maybe an expression of depression in Psalm 88. So, what is the value here? Now, think about how many psalms of lament are there? That ought to tell us something about the value. Because if you pick up, anybody still use a hymn book? A few of you? I like using a hymn book. I like it either way. I mean, I can use PowerPoint or hymn book. I'm good either way. It doesn't bother me. But there's something about having a hymn book that is a repository of theology. You know, it's a repository of confession. This is what we sing, right? And we sing these words because we believe these words. These words are important to us, and they teach us something, and they tell us something. And that's true about PowerPoint as well. But having a hymn book, you could actually sit down and read some of these hymns. It always, wouldn't say always, but typically it astounds me sometimes when I'm singing a hymn that I haven't sung in a long time, how the words are much more meaningful to me now than I really appreciated back then. Yeah. And I think that's, when you think about the Psalter as the hymn book of Israel, what was sung in the temple. Remember, this has several levels. You have the person who wrote it, whatever that context was for them, But then you have this other context, that this song or this prayer is brought into the assembly, into the corporate communal life of Israel, and now we sing it as a people. Not just as individuals, but as a people. And we sing it for the people among us, right? And then there's another level in which the Psalms say something about Jesus. They say something about Christ. And how we hear the Psalms then at all these different levels. But if you think about this as a hymn book for the corporate life of Israel, that they would sing and worship together, how many of the Psalms are lament? Almost half. You can say maybe 1/4 of the Psalms are what we might call confidence Psalms. And this would be a broad category that would include like wisdom Psalms and creation Psalms like Psalm 104, or like the most famous Psalm of all, right? At least in America, United States. Which one am I thinking of? 23. Yeah, Psalm 23, right? Psalm 23, which became very popular in the Civil War. So many burials. Psalm 23 was what was read at the burials. Wasn't that popular before that, at least in the United States. So Psalm 23 is a confidence psalm, right? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. It's confidence. You set a table. You put me in the presence of my enemies. You set a table for me in the presence of my enemies. It's confidence psalm. About a quarter of the Psalms are like that. And then another quarter of the Psalms are like thanksgiving Psalms, like Psalm 107 or Psalm 116. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice, and I will lift up the cup of thanksgiving, and I will fulfill my vows in the presence of all the people. Right? Psalm 116. But half of the Psalms, close to half, generalities, right, are lament. They may lament about injustice. They may lament about death. They may lament about being falsely accused, like Psalm 7. They may lament about communal tragedy, like defeat, like Psalm 44. They may lament about sin, like Psalm 51. They may lament about illness, like Psalm 88. But a lot of the Psalms of lament are kind of general, which is the opening for the congregation, for the assembly of God's people, to join in that psalm, to use those words as their words. I doubt that Psalm 13, that the person who wrote Psalm 13, or that the congregation of Israel that sang it in the temple, had the same thing in mind when they said, "How long, O Lord, that I have when I sing it, or when I pray it?" I doubt we have exactly the same situation. Now, we may have. There's potential for overlap, of course. But that's the beauty of poetry. It's the beauty of hymnology, is that we can enter into that world and bring our own stuff in that world and name it, right? And name it. But does it strike you as strange that half of the prayers of Israel, half of their songs, are lament? Going back to hymn book, how many lament songs are in our typical hymn book? There's some there. But not typically, certainly not half. Certainly not half. When I was in Ukraine one time, they wanted me to talk about the Psalms, and so I was walking through the Psalms with them, talking about different categories and different genres and looking at different examples. And the Psalms they connected with, that they really thought, this is my world, were the lament Psalms. They couldn't connect with the Thanksgiving Psalms as much. Their whole history of being an invaded country, gave them a reservoir of lament. Much like African Americans in the South, right? They have a reservoir of lament, what W.B. Du Bois called the sorrow songs, or we called them the old spirituals that expressed lament. So cultures have a way of expressing the lament, but it seems like the culture I grew up in, or at least the situation I grew up in, or the subculture I grew up in, I don't know how to name it, didn't know how to lament. At least I didn't know how to lament. And so when Sheila died, I didn't know what to do with that. Reading the Psalms gave me the words that I needed in order to pray again. Because I could use their words. Now, sometimes we have a tradition that praying is only about, speaking your own words. I remember growing up that if somebody read a prayer, it was a really weird thing. Right? We don't like read prayer. We want you to pray from your heart. Don't read a prayer. And that's kind of part of me. But I resist that part of me now. Because when I read the Psalms, I began to read prayers. And they became my prayers. Those words became my words. And when people come to me and they talk about, I find it really hard to pray. I can appreciate that. It is hard to pray sometimes. We don't have the words. We don't have the kind of emotional energy, maybe. We're having kind of a distrust, maybe. Maybe there's a faith situation that we're working on. So, yeah, sometimes it is hard to pray. Read prayers. When it's hard to pray, read prayers. All kinds of prayers available to read. Reading the prayers in the Psalms is one way. Right? But reading prayers is a way of entering into that experience. I don't have to come up with the words. I don't have to come up with, okay, how do I nuance this? There's all sorts of things going through my head when I'm trying to generate a prayer. But reading the prayers gives me a way of expressing to God my own heart and my own feelings. Because Psalm 13 was my prayer. Until I got to verses 5 and 6. I trust. That's the work. That's the struggle. Is voicing the complaint, even offering the petition, but can I also offer the praise? Can I do both at the same time? And here's where the model of Jesus comes back into play. Jesus did both at the same time. Think about that moment on the cross. He quotes a lament psalm, Psalm 22, verse 1, which is a psalm about someone who's threatened with death, who's on the verge of death, and cries out and says, my God, why have you abandoned or forsaken me? Now notice there's several things going on there. Why are you so far from hearing me? That's what the next line says. In other words, he doesn't think, God's not listening. That is, God's not acting. God's not doing something. I don't think anybody ever really believes God doesn't hear. It's that God doesn't respond, or God doesn't act, or God doesn't do. We don't see the evidence of God at work. So why doesn't God do something here? So why are you so far from listening to me? Why don't you respond to me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Notice first that it's my God. It's not, you used to be my God. It's still my God. There's still a relationship here. That's why I'm talking to you, right? I still have a relationship. That's why Psalm 88 is even there. Even though there's no praise in that psalm, there is a relationship. He calls, you're my God. He asks why in that psalm. In fact, he argues with God in that psalm. It's an argument I used about my son Joshua. An argument that says, wouldn't it be great if I could stay alive and attend the assembly of God and praise you in the assembly, and I would be, what a witness that would be, what a testimony. I prayed that over my son 100 times. God, if you would just heal Joshua, wouldn't that be a wonderful witness to you? And people would praise you. And Joshua would praise you. And I would praise you. I think it's still a pretty good argument. We see it in Psalm 30. And we see it in Psalm 88. But I think the problem is learning to trust that. Right? So Jesus says, my God, there's a relationship. But he also has a sense of abandonment. Why have you forsaken me? He's abandoned. I think primarily it's about being abandoned to death, because God's not going to reach down and save him from death. And there are a lot of other theological reflections we could pursue about what abandonment might mean in that context. But let's just keep it at the death part, because that's something we can feel too. Abandoned to death. You know people who've been abandoned to death. God could have saved them. God could have healed them. But they were abandoned to death. My God, you abandoned. Why? Why? Is there a rationale for this? Is there a reason for this? Is there a purpose to this? Is there a meaning to this? Why? Jesus asked that question. I know sometimes we'll talk more about this at another moment, another session, but I've heard people tell people not to ask why. I've heard that was the piece of advice they would give. You don't need to ask why. Why? You should be asking why not me, not why me. Now, why not me is a good question too. But why me is also a good question. Jesus asked it. I think I can fit in that. I think I can follow that one. If Jesus asked why, I can ask why. If the psalmist asked why, I can ask why. If Job asked why, I can ask why. If Jeremiah asked why, I can ask why. The why is not a bad question. The problem is we don't know how to answer it. We'll talk more about that another time. So in hearing what Jesus said, my God, why abandoned? We're hearing a lament. Now, do you remember? That's Matthew and Mark. They both emphasize this cry of dereliction. My God, why have you forsaken me? Luke has a different way of approaching this. Luke can still think about the darkness that is a part of this moment, because he describes, he has Jesus saying to those who are the powers who are arresting him and taking him into custody. He has a saying about the power of darkness reigns. That right now the power of darkness reigns. He recognizes the darkness. He recognizes how the powers are assaulting him and how the powers are taking control, you might say. and they're going to execute him. He recognizes the powers of darkness. And yet, when you look at Jesus on the cross, what's he doing? It's not quite the picture of the lament. I don't think it denies the lament, but Luke's just going at it a different way. But if we think about this as an event in which Jesus is lamenting, notice what also Jesus is doing on the cross. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, you remember some of his words from the cross? Father, forgive them. I don't know what they're doing. Wait a minute, is this the God who's forsaken him? So, in the same moment, let's say the 6 hours on the cross, Jesus is on the one hand saying, what's going on here? Why are you abandoning me? Why are you not even listening to me? And then in Luke, he's saying, Father, here's the relationality. Forgive them. He's standing in for those who are crucifying him. There's kind of a reconciliation, forgiveness going on there. You remember what else he says from the cross in Luke? Has to do with the thief. What does he say to the thief? Today you'll be with me in paradise. There's hope there, right? That's a hopeful statement. He's lamenting, and the power of darkness has taken over, but he's hopeful. There's more to this. There's something else going on. And then what were his last words from the cross in Luke? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Into your hands, which is a quotation from Psalm 31. So on the cross, Jesus can quote a psalm of lament, and then he can quote a psalm of trust. He can do both at the same time, essentially. Sort of like Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? Nevertheless, I trust in your unfailing love. You see, in the moment of the cross, Jesus can lament and affirm lament and model lament, and at the same time, trust. Jesus can express frustration and perplexity, bewilderment maybe. I don't know what other words of emotion you might attach to that lament. And at the same time, be forgiving to his executioners, offering hope to his fellow, what am I trying to say here? The one who's executed with him, right? And trust that God is going to hold him in death. I think that's a hard place to get to. I don't think that I am always there. When I'm lamenting, I don't know that trust is always a part of what I'm doing when I'm lamenting. I don't know that forgiveness is always a part of what I'm doing when I'm lamenting, especially if I've been falsely accused, or I've been betrayed, or you can name it, right? It's hard then to say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. But it is the model that we're offered. If we are disciples of Jesus, and we have followed Jesus into the water, and we follow him into the wilderness, and we follow him into his ministry, we also follow him into his suffering. And in his suffering, he laments. And it gives us permission to lament. It gives us permission to ask questions. It gives us permission to express our hearts and to tell God what we really feel. Because God already knows anyway, right? I was in a group of parents with their terminally ill children. We were gathered in a place, and they'd asked me to come talk with them. These were children who were terminally ill for different reasons, but these families found each other, and they formed a support group, and they asked me to come and talk with them on a couple of occasions. And one occasion, they were just telling their stories, each family telling their stories. And one mother felt safe enough in this group to just really tell us how she feels about God, how angry she is at God, and how distant she feels from God, and how God doesn't care. And she just expressed her heart. And we listened. Nobody judged. Nobody said, stop that. But we all sat in silence after her unburdening of herself. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? She said, fine, you can ask. Do you tell God what you just told us? I didn't know what to expect, because some people do. I mean, they do tell God. But she said, no, I would never do that. She lacked the experience of lament. She had no models in her life for that. She had not seen it done. She had not experienced it. And I think that part of healing with our wounds, part of healing, the journey of healing, is telling God how we feel. Because God already knows. You're not going to surprise God. Oh, you really thought that, huh? No. You're not going to surprise God. And this was the block I had in my own head, right? When I wasn't praying, I was thinking I might say something so negative, so angry, that it might cross a line. So I just better shut up. And what was going on in my head, that block that I had in my head, was really a way of saying, this is something I'm going to hide from God. As if I could hide it from God. And when I began to realize, I'm not really hiding it from God, but it is really how I feel, the best thing is just to tell God how I feel. Because lament becomes a kind of spiritual therapy. A spiritual therapy that I can do in private, but I also can do in community. Because these lament psalms in Israel were a part of the community. We shared these stories. We shared these laments. We shared these prayers in Israel. And the same is true for the church. The church has to find a place for communal lament. It has to find a place where we're not just doing pep rallies every Sunday. It has to find a place where we can name the hurts in our community and call upon our community to hurt with us, to weep with those who weep, as well as rejoice with those who rejoice. My wife had this experience. She had a stillborn child, before I married her. She had a stillborn child. And she'd had a friendship with a person in the church. They were friends, good friends in the church. This was up here in Washington State, by the way. But it was, they were co-pregnant, right? They were pregnant together. They were on the same schedule, you know. And their due dates were like 2 days apart, you know. So they were just buddy, you know. Well, Jennifer's child was born stillborn. Hers was born healthy. They go to church the next Sunday. Well, maybe it's not the next Sunday. I think it's the first Sunday the newborn was there. Maybe that's the best way to say it. The first Sunday the newborn was there. And the song leader said, well, the newborn is here. He said, let's sing God is good. God is so good. God is so good. And Jennifer, who was sitting right behind her with her newborn, had to go to the bathroom to cry her eyes out. Now, I know we can't be sensitive about everything because we don't know everything. Right? And we don't reveal everything to each other. We don't know each other's hurts very well unless we share those stories. But we have to make place not only to rejoice, we have to make place to lament as a community together. Because that's what Israel did. Right? And I think through the spiritual therapy of lament, there's a way in which healing takes place. Not all of a sudden, not all at once, but over time, in community, speaking the truth to God, the truth of our hearts, just like you'd want your children to speak the truth of their hearts to you. God says, please tell me. And my image of talking to God in lament is the image I have of my son Joshua sitting on my lap. In my big, I had this big, what do you call it? Recliner chair. You know, big chair, big puffy recliner chair. And I'd lean that back, and he would lay across my shoulders here. He would be basically immobile, not really able to move. And he would be laying across my shoulder, across my body, and watching The Wizard of Oz. You know. And that's the image I have of God holding me when I'm lamenting. It's a healing image for me. But it's something I had to learn to do because it didn't come natural to me. It was more natural for me to hide it, suppress it, press it down. But when I found myself truly expressing it and engaged in it, I found a process of healing. The whole creation groans, Paul says, and we groan, and the Spirit groans with us. Groaning is a part of our lives, and we need to give it expression. Privately, communally, and ultimately, fully. Let's see. Oh, wow, it's already 12. I'm sorry. I went a little long with that, didn't I? Is there anything anybody wants to say in response, or any word you want to share with the group? Just, I think lunch is 12:15. Is that right? Yeah, man.
You were talking about the difference between the hymnal and the psalter, and it just made me think of how like modern Christian radio, it's even more different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the tone of, like, I've often thought what it would be like if Christian radio had as much lament as the Psalms.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of the trajectory that even the church is on in terms of our willingness to acknowledge grief and make it part of our faith, that if the modern Christian radio is even more that direction than our hymnals.
Yeah, contemporary Christian music typically is more upbeat. You can find some songs of lament, but not in the proportion that we find in the kind of the Psalter. And it is very culturally shaped. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that culture shapes our hymnology and what we sing about and the kind of the words we use and what we're concerned about. And so maybe it names something that culturally we need to at least be aware of and find ways to prepare people to lament. I was not prepared to lament when I was 22 years old. I wasn't prepared for that. And maybe my fault, I don't know, but I wasn't prepared for it. And so it devastated me. Part of being community is we lament with each other. We share each other's griefs. We share each other's wounds. We speak to one another about our hurts and pains. And that way we prepare each other for lament, and we prepare each other to suffer even the worst things. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.